Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's crazy. Right before I started Trikafta, for a whole year I just ate squash. Like literally.
Wait, why?
Only squash.
Yeah.
That would get so old.
It was
so
vegetables, fruits, and squash because when I had proteins and fats, I would cough so much. I never ate the CF diet. I'd always get into fights with my dietitians. I was the worst CF patient ever. Like the doctors would like internally roll their eyes whenever I walked in for an appointment.
I can't even imagine.
I was just that kid. Like I wanted to, like my dietitian and I never got along because she just was like, you can have vegetables and potato chips. And I was like, I'm an athlete, I'm a dancer. I want to dance professionally. I care about how I feel. I'm not going to follow that. I'm not going to do it. I'm not saying it was the right choice to eat only squash and vegetables, but I didn't get a chest infection that entire year.
Madison, how old are you?
I'm 25.
Cool.
On God.
How many TikTok dances do you know?
I don't know any. You know what?
Okay,
I'm
yeah,
so
see?
old. I like for my age, like my sisters joke that I'm like a 40-year-old woman in a 25-year-old's body. Like they're like, you don't.
Are there names for the TikTok dances? I don't even fucking know. Like I was like, what
I
is it?
don't
Like
even know.
like the thrash and bash.
Yeah.
I think they have cooler names than that.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
like the doo wop,
Yeah.
the doo wop ditty.
Yeah, I don't know. How often
about
do you
that?
dab?
How about-
Like, do you ever dab or
Dab. How often do you do dabs? That's what I'm. That's what I want to know.
You know, my sisters should be here on this podcast because I can't even answer these questions.
Oh, let me guess. You can't. Wait. Do you know what doing dabs is?
Isn't it like?
Yeah,
No.
No.
Well,
not the dance.
that is-
I'm
that
talking
is
about.
dab.
That's a dab.
That's doing the dab. I'm
That's
saying
right.
if you're hitting dabs, if you're doing dabs,
What is that?
It means you love smoking really,
Big-
really intense THC that
And this is
no
the-
one should ever smoke.
and this is the thing. This is great. This is a great starting place.
This is
Okay.
we have started.
We have 3 millennials talking to a zillennial, technically a Gen Z, but according to Madison, a geriatric trapped in a 25-year-old's body. And I asked, so she knows how to dab, but I asked, how do you feel about doing big old dabs? And she didn't know what I was talking about. And I don't think it has anything to do with her age. I think it has 100% everything to do with the fact that she has cystic fibrosis and she's a good patient. And that's why she's not doing massive dabs out of a big bong that's filled with slushy water so that the smoke tastes cool and like raspberry smash.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to do dabs. Doing dabs is like when smoking weed looks more like cooking and smoking. That's what doing dabs is.
Madison, have you ever smoked before?
I have not. I don't even eat gluten, guys. So I don't think you know what I mean.
Sweet.
I am pretty clean with all that stuff.
Plus, on top of that, UFCF. So there we go. We're in it. Madison, you have cystic fibrosis.
I do, yes.
Cool club to be a part of these days.
Mhm.
25 years old. Give us a little introduction. Well, you know what? Let's start off with this. Introduce yourself. Let our listeners know a little bit more about you, other than the fact that you eat dinner for breakfast and you don't do dabs.
Nice. Well, I think professionally, I am an actress. I'm a writer. I'm a screenwriter with my 2 sisters. They actually remind me a lot of you guys because there's 3 of us and we work together and we do everything together. We work in a mental health nonprofit together that we're very passionate about for the past 6 years, and we're screenwriting together and adapting a book that we wrote into a screenplay, which has been really fun.
Who's Jason Bateman?
Oh, my sister Ava. She's really funny.
Okay.
She's really funny. I'm trying to think. I'm probably Will Arnett, and then Elle would be oh my gosh,
The third guy. What's his name?
What's his name?
The third guy is Sean,
Poor
and that's why
Sean.
Brian
Poor
is Sean.
Sean. Yeah,
That's
the
why
one that
Brian is
everyone
our
forgets.
Sean.
Yeah. A lot of our listeners write to us and they tell me that I'm Jason Bateman, but
Wow.
yeah.
Smartless comparisons for anybody who's wondering.
Yeah, that's fun.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. I was just sitting here the whole time going, no one knows what the fuck we're talking about. Cool. That's so. And man, I feel like you and I are kind of long lost brother and sister.
I think so.
Nice. So I'm curious, just kind of dialing things back to your CF.
Yeah.
You're 25. When were you diagnosed?
I was diagnosed at birth. So,
Oh, right,
'cause-
right. They would have been pre-screening, right? Like at
yes,
that time.
I know, because I just listened to your podcast with Dr. Jody Carrington, and I
Mhm,
remember you talking about how you were 18 months because that was
mhm,
before, right? The pre-screening.
That's right. Yeah.
So yeah, so they knew right away. I was born with a meconium ileus, so it was a distended abdomen, so my bowel was blocked right when I was born,
Oh
and they
wow.
rushed me away from my mother, and I was operated on at 1 day old. So surgery at
Ugh.
1 day old, and I spent the first couple of months in the NICU, and I'm the first child, so my parents, it was just such a traumatic experience for my parents as new parents to just go through that. My dad had just started a new job. It was like really, really hard on them. And yeah, that was my entry into the world. And every 3 months, just going to the hospital and getting checkups and stuff from there. So I don't really know a life without it. I've always
Right.
Yeah.
I take it that when obviously that first surgery went well, but did they have to do anything to, like Jer had a bowel obstruction and had his large intestine,
Oh
much of it
wow.
removed.
Okay.
Did they have to like take anything out of you or do anything
Yeah.
to you?
Yeah, they had to take out a little chunk of my blocked bowel. So it was like, like as a baby, you have to have your first bowel movement. It was blocked. So
Hmm.
they had to take that part of my colon out and stitch it back. So I have a scar on my stomach from it.
Well,
And
What
it's
does a scar look like from like if you're a baby
I
and you have
know.
surgery? What it like? Do you have it? Do you have any other scars that you got? I don't know, like with it, in recent history that you have on your body?
I had appendicitis, so I did get my appendix removed.
And
And
the scar when you were a baby versus the
yeah,
appendicitis, like does it change? Like when
it
I mean, there's so
doesn't.
much growth. There's so
I
much.
know.
You become so much bigger.
I
So like, does the
know.
scar just go just
It
like
does.
little tiny, or
It doesn't. No, unfortunately not. It's
stretches
like-
out with you? Does it?
Yeah, it grows with you, unfortunately. Yeah, so it was funny when I got appendicitis. I was like, really, do I need to get like another scar? Like, I think I'm okay. Like, you just like the belly button under, I was just like, I look all stitched up. But, and I actually had a close friend who had cancer. She had this genetic condition for cancer. And she was like the first person that I felt really connected to who also had a health disability. And she had a
Mm.
scar on the exact same side as I did. And she was the first person who I knew who had a scar too and was young, and she passed away when I was 10, and that was really
Mm.
devastating and hard.
Mhm.
But she was my role model. She was amazing. She was just the coolest person ever to me, and she did so much work for cystic fibrosis. She did a lot of work for the Canadian Cancer Society. We actually met because I did public speaking, like fundraising for the Canadian Cystic Fibrosis Foundation when I was young.
Mhm.
So I'd go on stage with my mom. I was about 3 at the time. She was at the same event that we were at. I forget exactly where we were, but we met there, and it was just this instant connection of
Hmm.
just like, you meet certain people and you're just like, I feel like I've known you my whole life.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
for about, I'd say, how old was she? I think 7 years she was in my life. And she was she was diagnosed with a really severe form of cancer, I think when she was 27. And she died by the time she was 30. So it's
Mm.
weird for me too, because I know, Jeremy, you talk about this, having this timeline in your head of 30 because you thought you would die by the time you were 30. For me, it's been weird seeing with 30, my friend passed away when she was 30. So there's just this
Mm.
sense of like, when I turn 30, I feel like it's going to be weird because I'm going to start to outlive my friend.
Yeah, I mean, so like I'm about a decade older than you,
Yeah.
and I had that timeline of like 30, thinking 30 was going to be like the
Yeah.
age that I was going to die.
Right.
As someone who was born, 10 years later, what did living with a life-shortening illness look like for you? How did you how did you feel about the idea of having a basically a time limit on your life? Or were these things that you thought about? Like what did that look like for you, like in terms of identity and the way that you
Yeah.
viewed your illness? How did that look for you over the years that you were, coming up to where we are today with Trikafta?
Yeah, I feel like it was actually very different from what you experienced. And I don't know if it's because I was born 10 years later that things were more advanced, because my parents told me that when I was born, the doctor said the usual, like she'll be lucky if she lives to see her 18th birthday kind of thing. But they also said that there's going to be a drug that will be available in her lifetime that will be life changing. And so for my parents, it became a matter of just keeping me alive. I recently had this conversation with my mom because I listened to your podcast with Connie, and it made me think about, okay, I should start talking to my parents about this and ask them what was their experience. And my mom told me that they always believed that I would be the exception. They went to seminars to talk to other CF patients, and my mom met some CF patients who were not doing well and others who were thriving in like 40 and doing amazing. And my mom would ask them, what did you do that, sorry if you can hear that, what did you do that contributed to such an amazing life that you had? And they said it was mindset, it was how my parents raised me. They just told me to just go and live my life and just create a lot of identity building experiences outside the illness. So that just became my parents' mission for me. And I didn't realize cystic fibrosis was a fatal disease until I was like 18 and I transitioned into the adult clinic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was 18 years old at the clinic, and I it was also one of those things when I was young, like I knew that young people died. Because I remember walking through the halls of sick kids at 5 and seeing a kid my age, bald, attached to an IV, and ill. And it made me feel really sad. And I would draw. I did a lot of drawing as a kid. I did a fundraiser with an art gallery to raise money for cystic fibrosis. And I kind of just channeled all those emotions I felt into art and self-expression. But I never thought it would be me. I just thought, and even when I did fundraising for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, I did spokesperson work. It was always, I'm healthy enough to do this. I'm the voice for those CF patients who are sick and can't do this right now. But I never thought it was me. It was never something that I identified with. My parents never said that this is something you're going to die of young. So it just always became this thing within our family that I would be the exception. I would defy the odds. And when I turned 18, doctors were starting to talk to me and it was actually such a weird shock for me because my whole life I knew that CF was a severe disease. Like I even remember when I was like 10, and I'm starting to be more conscious in the doctor's offices when we'd go and visit. And they would always freak out if I had a chest infection. Like they were acting like I was going to die. Like they were acting like it was life and death. And I remember thinking like, why are they freaking out? Like I'm fine. Like what are they, like it was never something for me that was ever on my mind. And by 18, my health really started to decline, and doctors were starting to talk to me about, okay, well, you got to start to come to terms with the progression of this disease. And that was one of the lines that started to make me think, oh, okay, what do they mean by that? Like what? And so that really created a spiral for me of starting to realize what I was dealing with.
When I hear you describe like the way that you felt and the way that your parents felt of like, oh, like, you'll be the exception. I feel like when I met Jer, that was like immediately my default was you being like, I have CF and like, it's this thing. And like, I'm getting like sick. I'm getting sicker over time and it's deteriorating and I'll eventually die and I'll die young. And like my first thought, Jer was 23 when I met him and I was 20. And I was like, my default was like, oh, but it's happening over time. And so I think by the time you're at the age where you're supposed to die, there will be something that will save you. I like actually looking back, that was like super naive of me to think at the time. There wasn't really this like huge indication that was at all real. It was just like a feeling.
Right.
But something that really interests me about CF, that's fascinating about CF, especially for parents, is like when we did this series for cystic fibrosis, Breathless, and we kind of dug into the history of like the drugs that kind of evolved over time that eventually became Trikafta, was that it was kind of this like promise from the early to mid 90s that they had found this thing that they thought would be what Trikafta is now, but they thought it would happen really quickly. They thought it was going to happen much faster.
Wow.
And so like, just for like families and like obviously parents of young kids who were sort of like on this journey of probably being pretty in the know about what was going on in the CF world and like what was on the horizon of going, oh, like, is this it? Ah, oh, no, it's not. Oh, there's this drug and there's this development and then now there's this treatment. It doesn't really work that well. Or it doesn't, like my kid doesn't qualify for it because it's not the right mutation. And then like, just that kind of like roller coaster of holding on to that feeling like my kid's going to be the exception.
Yeah.
And
It reminds me of a disclosure for the like non-human intelligence and UFOs.
Yes.
You know, it's like, oh yeah, David Grush is testifying before
Exactly.
Congress. Oh, and no, it's
yeah.
it's
Yeah,
not coming
yeah,
out.
yeah.
You know,
Soon,
again,
but
yeah.
soon.
But
Yeah.
Taylor, I felt like you, but I think the first time that feeling started to change was when we went to the celebration of life for that 12-year-old boy that died
Yeah.
from cystic fibrosis, and like realizing that in life it's easy to think of yourself as the exception when your life hasn't been affected by something in a really extreme way. And as you know, as you get older and have more experiences, you start to realize that like you're not the exception in a lot of ways. And I
Especially
feel
when
like
something happens that like reminds you of your
Mhm.
mortality.
Yes.
Like even if you're not sick.
and
Like,
so like
with anything like
I mean,
chronic or anything.
I think
Yeah.
I think it's sometimes nice to live with that like blissful ignorance, but then also at some point sometimes you have to confront the fact that
It makes being
know,
smacked out of that ignorance a
Really
hell of a lot
fucking hard.
harder.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I'm curious. Like you say that it kind of dawned on you at 18 that you were living with an illness that, statistically speaking, is going to leave you, living a lot shorter of a life than most of your peers.
Yeah.
Was this something that you went to your parents and talked about, or like how did you react to it in terms of the people around you, and how and what kind of like questions did you have?
Yeah, it's interesting because I just went straight into action and trying to control things. So for me at 18, I was in this cycle of antibiotics every month, and it
Mhm.
was hell. Like it was taking a toll on my gut health, it was taking a toll on my mental health. I was experiencing severe depression, like so depressed, like almost suicidal, but not, but like
Mhm.
that severe. And I realized and the doctors were doing everything they could, but just again, like it was getting to a point where it was like my lung function was at like 60%. Like it was not good. And I decided to take it upon myself to figure out what else I could do to change it. So I didn't accept it. It wasn't
Mm.
something that I was like,
Mhm.
I literally, even though it was like probably delusional to do that, I was just like, like accept what you can't change and change what you can't accept. I was like, I'm going to change what I can't accept. And I tried so many alternative methods. We did a lot of energy healing. We did Chinese acupuncture, Chinese herbs. I discovered this breathing method called Placebo breathing. That was this Russian doctor. I don't know if you've heard of it, but there was this whole book they wrote on cystic fibrosis and how it helps in Russia cystic fibrosis patients. And I was desperate at this point. So I came onto this call of this like random British Placebo breathing specialist, and I started trying it. And for the first couple of months, it did improve my lung function. I felt so much better. I thought, okay, this is going to be the thing that gets me out of this really difficult time of my health starting to fail. And 2 months in, my health started to get worse again, and even worse than before. So I started waking up every single day with like super thick green mucus. And it didn't matter how much I coughed, it didn't matter how much I got up, every single day it was the same cycle. It just felt like I was like in Groundhog Day every single day. And my parents understandably started freaking out because they were super supportive. So I never had a conversation of, Mom and Dad, I think I'm dying. How should we talk about this? It was, I'm going to change this and I'm going to figure out how not to die. I'm going to be the exception. I'm going to be the one who's going to live till 70, and I'm going to figure it out. And I'm going to do it my way. And I'm going to and my parents were super supportive of me with that. But at this point, and at this time I was 19, I started to lose a lot of weight as well. Like I went from, usually I'm like 120 pounds. I went down to 88 pounds.
Oh wow.
Whoa.
I literally looked like if you see those people who are in like a survival story, like I just watched Society of the Snow, of that airplane that crashed and all those guys who were starving. I got so triggered watching that movie because I literally looked like that. I was emaciated. I could barely walk from my couch to my bathroom. My body just shut down, and my parents were freaking out. They're just like, I'd never experienced something like this. And the practitioners we were working with at the time literally abandoned us. They just were literally like, oh, well, there's nothing we can do to help you. We've never seen this before. Good luck. So it was just my mom and I trying to like online figure out what to do. And it was more my mom because I didn't have the capacity to even like stay conscious for very long, to be honest. Like I was sleeping most of the time. My whole family thought I was dying. Like I visited my cousins and they all freaked out. And and it was weird because like I wasn't on the outside looking at myself, so I didn't think I looked like I was dying. But when I
Sure.
saw my family, they were like terrified. They thought
Mm.
this was it. They thought I was literally going to die. And luckily, my mom found this other Buteyko breathing practitioner because I thought, like, Buteyko breathing, I thought that it was like yoga, right? Like, you sign up for a hot yoga class and you think, you know, it's pretty much the same no matter where you go. Hot yoga is hot yoga. But it's not the case with Buteyko breathing. There's so many different forms of it and so many different disciples of the guy who created it. So, luckily, my mom got a hold of this woman, Sasha, who told my mom right away what I needed to do. She's like, you need to feed her. And at this point too, I wasn't walking. I was in a wheelchair. Like I literally had no capacity to do anything. And she said,
And
"You
was
gotta-"
your was like were you withering away at this point because of like so for context for I mean most people that are listening are probably aware of CF to some degree, but like your like do you suffer from the digestive issues plus the lung stuff?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And so you were down to like 88 pounds.
Yeah.
Was that what was that like? What was that due to? Was that due to the lung function was so bad that you weren't able to like even take in food because you were throwing like what
Yeah.
led to that?
Yeah, so it's interesting because speaking with this Buteyko breathing practitioner, Sasha, this is what we discovered was that I had chronically infected tonsils. So she had this thing called chroniocepsis, which is basically just like chronically infected tonsils. And she had it, her husband had it. And my mom was telling her our situation. And because it also, when you have chronically infected tonsils, you can get that reoccurring, like really, like it was really like terrible, like the mucus like smelt really bad and it was green and it was just every single day, like really, really bad. And more than just a chest infection bad, like it was like something even more. So she suggested to my mom to get my tonsils checked. And I went to a bunch of different doctors in Toronto and they just refused. Like they were like, there's nothing wrong with your tonsils. You're fine. But I'm like, I don't feel fine. And we found a doctor in the States who Sasha had used. And he had operated on Sasha and her husband. He looked at mine. He was like, okay, you need to be operated on. I got the operation at like 100 pounds. And he was like, you're like the size of a small child. I don't know if you're even healthy enough to operate on, but I will do this. And after the operation, he said, your tonsils are like couscous on the inside. Like they are
Yeah.
just wrecked. And that was what was causing this, like enhancing all of this bad stuff. And it was shutting down my gut. It was shutting down my lungs. Like, and then all of that, like it just made me feel really unwell. And then I lost my appetite, which caused, me to drop so low in the 88 pounds. I just couldn't eat. I couldn't stomach anything. And then after getting my tonsils removed, my health started to go back up. Like it felt like, because before that, it felt like everything I did to improve my health, it just wouldn't work. Like it wasn't working. Nothing was working. And then once I got my tonsils out, everything started to gradually get a bit better. And then it plateaued. And then that's when I started Trikafta. But it definitely got better after the tonsils.
What did tonsils do?
I was having the exact same thought. I have no idea what tonsils do. I know that for a period of time, it was like everybody you knew had them removed.
yeah.
They help
Yeah.
filter out germs that enter through your nose or mouth to protect the rest of your body from infection.
They're like a second
Wow, how
immune
ironic.
system.
They're like
Yeah.
they're like the tip of a cigarette
Like a
before
filter.
you bust it and before you bust it off to take the tobacco out to throw
put
into
it-
your
to-
dabs.
To throw into your dabs or your spliffs.
Yeah.
Why?
Not that I would
This
know,
is
I
a
have
total. This is a total sidetrack tangent. But like, why? I feel like everybody in our age group had their tonsils removed. I didn't, but a lot of
Wow.
people did.
Yeah.
It was like a standard. It was kind of like it seemed like
Wow.
as standard as getting your wisdom teeth out. It was like
That's common
it
for
was
sure,
an
yeah.
eventuality for most people to get their tonsils
Wow.
removed, and I have no idea why.
I think it's because tonsils if you have tonsils it gives you
Right.
I'm pretty sure it's something
Really?
like, yeah, it's no, I'm joking. Madison, I'm joking. That's a joke. But I do,
I fell for that one.
Yeah, I do think
Madison,
the kid,
don't believe anything that comes out of
Yeah.
Jared's mouth.
I know. I've learned my lesson.
I do think that I mean, at least when we were kids, the kids were just having like tonsil infections all the time. And I think if you had chronic tonsil infections, you're gonna get your tonsils removed. It's like if you grew up with anyone who got tubes in their ears, and it was because they had recurring ear infections, and they eventually get, which I don't even know what the fuck that is, tubes in your ears. Stick straws in your ears.
That's ear infection stuff. It's to drain the fluid.
So I think the tonsil thing is like, oh, you keep getting these infections in your tonsils, can take the fuckers out. Now I don't know if they still do that today.
Maybe
Well,
it's from the microplastics or 5G.
Well, I mean, now we're onto something.
You never know.
Well, it's also, I had chronic strep throat when I was a kid. Like, I had it
Same,
like 5
yeah.
times, so it just
Same.
destroyed. Yeah.
Do you think it's because
when this was all going on, like, were you, what did your like, your like Western medical CF treatments look like? You know, are you're taking like creon enzyme or not creon, but like your pancreatic enzymes? Were you doing like aerosols and like things like Ventolin and stuff? Like, what did that look like for you? What were you doing?
Yeah, so physio, the PEP mask. I was taking Creon 10, and I do hypersal. So for me, Ventolin actually decreased my lung function, interestingly. So I did this thing called hypersal. So it's just like salt water, breathing that in.
Yeah.
And I would also try to add like other things to my routine. So I exercised a lot. I ran a lot. Being a competitive dancer and having that background, I was always very athletic and fit, which made it even harder when my health started to decline because I wasn't used to it. When I was a kid, I had only been hospitalized twice in my life. That was it. So I was lucky that I was very healthy, but when my health started to decline, it was devastating. Like, I was not used to that at all. Yeah.
I have a question about alternative medicine in general. Like, just wondering, imagining myself being someone who's listening or living with a disease, and you're struggling to get treatment that works from the Western medical system.
Yeah.
I feel like one hesitation I would have with like pursuing alternative medicine or alternative therapies is that I feel like there are a lot of people out there who will take advantage of people who are desperate and sick. And so I feel like there's probably this like process of like trying to weed through some of that stuff, being skeptical and like hesitant about, what type of options are being presented to you. I'm curious if you can speak at all to like your experience of going through with all these like sort of weird treatments and, trying to figure out which ones might be effective and which ones might just be someone who's taking advantage of you.
Oh yeah, 100%. It's a great point you bring up because that is literally what I went through. Every doctor that alternative method doctor, whatever you call them, specialist, every single one of them promised that it would cure my cystic fibrosis, right?
Totally.
And it was just, and I knew that, like, I wasn't naive enough to be like I knew it was a business. I knew what they were doing, but I was willing to try and see. So everything I did, I was just like, let's just see what happens. Let's just see if anything gets better. For acupuncture, it did help a little bit, but not significantly. The herbs helped a little bit, but not significantly. The Rife machine got rid of rhinovirus, which was really interesting. But the side effects of the Rife machine, after using it, I'd have to like soak in Epsom salts for like 20 minutes. It was really intense detoxing. And I did it so much, like, because I had to like really get it out of my body, that I started to feel suicidal. Like, the side effects were so bad that I couldn't even it really f***ed with my mental health. And so that was a side effect. And then Bateko, obviously the side effect of doing it not properly was like, I went down to 88 pounds and I could barely walk. So it was just this like really, and it was like trial and error. And for me, like, all these crazies all these stories are crazy, and for my family, it was harder on them than it was on me because I felt agency in the situation. I felt like I was doing something that could possibly help me get better. And for my family, they a lot of times were just like had to just sit back and watch, and that was really hard on them because, like, what are you gonna do?
I feel like there's like I feel like I feel like there's natural medicine and there's alternative medicine, and I feel like a lot of times they get kind of lumped in. But I would probably separate those two things, those things into two separate categories. But like, you know, no, I don't think anything is going to, at least in the the current understanding of what we have in science, is like where anything is going to cure something in the way that we think about the word cure. And like, and by that I mean like, like now there's a cure for Hep C, for example, and it's like you take a I don't know, it's like a pill or like a pill for a few months or something like that, and then it's gone, like this like rapid curing of something.
The elimination of being diagnosed, like having the diagnosis of that disease.
Yeah. And that's kind of like the promise of Western medicine, is that like you can take this thing that you've got and then you can create something and then you can just take it away almost overnight. And Trikafta in some ways is sort of like that. The treatment continues for, forever, ostensibly. But like natural medicine, for example, like you probably get a shitload of things that you do, and each one of them has like a small benefit, and the aggregate of those benefits could be something that's significant, but no, like one thing is. And then on the alternative side, I think to your point, Brian, and obviously with your experience, Madison, is like, you've got some stuff that, just might be total quackery. You've got some stuff that there's like some evidence for, and, you find it helpful, but then the unregulated nature of all of it leaves the user really exposed. And like it does take, a pretty discerning person to try and wade through, like all the stuff that's out there to figure out like what's actually helpful and what applies to me and how can I use it for what I'm going through. But at the end of the day, if you're staring down the barrel of your deathbed, like, like you're obviously in the headspace of like, who cares?
I mean, I think where it gets really, where the waters get a bit muddy, and this kind of points back to what you said, Bri, is like where people are being taken advantage of, that happens, and it happens all the time. And it's like a real shame and a real like shit human thing to do, to someone. However, in the same breath, like and at the same time, there's something to be said for the placebo effect. I mean, it is a real thing, and it really does have a major effect on people's lives in a positive way.
100%.
There's also something to be said for, I'm not someone who's ever really sought out alternative treatments. However, I most certainly have had these aspects of my life that I attribute to my overall health and have like made a massive difference in cystic fibrosis in my body, that if I was to express those as a way to like, as a quote unquote treatment, you would call that an alternative therapy. You would write an alternative treatment.
You would write prescriptions for people to go to a stand-up comedy show and say that is therapeutic.
Totally. Or training as an actor in a conservatory style theater program. I mean, so what did that do for me? Well, that forced me to become so in tune with my own body, because that is your tool that you're using. So again, and this goes back to the Buteyko, breathing thing sort of that you were talking about. I mean, breath work was so beneficial for me, and all that breath work that I did in theater school was fucking massive. I mean, I could even point to yoga and like the practice of pranayama. Like that was a practice very similar to Buteyko breathing, from what I gather. It's, it seems like a form of pranayama. I mean, that was huge for me. It allowed me to like feel like I had more control over my breathing. And if I didn't have that, if I never did any of those things, and I just went to school to study something that, left me at a desk job, and I never really physically used my body, I might not be here.
And
right?
even if it's just a feeling.
Right. And that's my point about placebo, is that a feeling or a thought can go a fucking long way, a lot further than I think a lot of people give credit to.
But maybe not as far as my yoga instructor said in India. He said that you could cure cancer with your thoughts.
Yes.
Right.
If
you stick that piece of reed grass up your ass and suck up the water from the Ganges.
But the other part that I think is really, really important just to state here is that I think it's really, really messy when you start to ignore the advice entirely from the side of Western medicine and only focus in on the side of alternative. And, we see those types of things happen when it pops up in the news, when there's like a family of a mom and a dad, these two like granola types that have a kid who has meningitis, and they go, oh, no. We're just gonna give him honey and St. James wort, and that'll take it away. And then the kid's dead, and the parents end up going to fucking trial because of negligence to their child, right? So like you have to. It's about balancing the two and finding these things that, sure, if you're gonna like explore it, but also keep an open mind and also accept the fact that like, maybe it's not the thing for you, or maybe you're getting fucking scammed by some weirdo in a wizard hat. I don't know.
Well, we really went down a rabbit hole
did.
there, Madison. So this takes you right up to.
So then Trikafta comes into the
takes
picture,
you-
and you go, fuck all that shit. Give me the Western meds.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's crazy. Right before I started Trikafta, for a whole year, I just ate squash. Like literally.
Wait, why?
Only squash.
That would get
Only-
so old.
It was
so fast.
vegetables, fruits, and squash, because when I had proteins and fats, I would cough so much. And at this point, I was integrating like the Western advice of obviously physio and stuff, but I didn't follow the CF diet. I never ate the CF diet. I'd always get into fights with my dietitians. I was the worst CF patient ever. Like the doctors would like internally roll their eyes whenever I walked in for an appointment.
I can't even imagine. Yeah.
They were like
typical-
5% Greek yogurt on IV.
Yeah.
Yes.
All the
Yeah.
time.
No, literally, so when I was 16, I was training for a competitive dance competition. And I remember the nurse coming in, and I had an IV attached to me, and I had a thing of smoked salmon open. And I'm eating the smoked salmon as my IV's trick. And she's like, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm eating the paleo diet. I'm training for a dance competition. And she's like, okay. And I was just that kid. Like I wanted to, like my dietitian and I never got along because she just was like, you can have vegetables and potato chips. And I was like, I'm an athlete. I'm a dancer. I want to dance professionally. Like I care about how I look. I care about how I feel. I care about all of these things. I'm not going to follow that. I'm not going to do it. I'm not saying it was the right choice to eat only squash and vegetables, but I didn't get a chest infection that entire year. So it was like really like random stuff that I tried, and my lung function plateaued at 61%. And that's when I started Trikafta, because I knew, okay, I did everything I possibly could on my own to raise my lung function. And the doctors also told me, they thought I was crazy because Trikafta became available a year before I actually started it. So I tested for it the year before, and last minute I just was like, I don't want to start this right now, which everyone thought I was insane and crazy. But where I was coming from was, I want to raise my lung function as much as possible, because all the doctors are telling me it can only go up so much once you start Trikafta. So I had a very long-term vision of, I'm going to be okay for a year or however long it takes for me to naturally improve my lung function. Once it plateaus, I'm okay, and I'll start it. But every time I went into a doctor's appointment prior to starting Trikafta, it was just constant, like, the doctors tried everything. They tried every tactic on me. They tried to, like, scare me. They'd show me, which I'm not saying was right, but it was, like, I remember, like, one of the doctors trying to basically say, like, your lungs are deteriorating. You have all of this, like, lung damage. They showed me the x-ray. And that just scared me even more. Like I think there's something to be said for how doctors communicate with you. I think there needs to be more empathetic, compassionate communication with patients, because I was just met with judgment. I was met with, you're f***ing crazy. What's your problem? Like there's one doctor at the clinic, Dr. Tullis. She's the head doctor at St. Michael's Hospital. She's phenomenal. And I had a conversation and call with her, and she's the single reason why started Trikafta, because up until that point I didn't feel heard by doctors. Anytime I would try, there was an antibiotic once I went on, and it started to like affect my ankles and like my tendons, and it freaked me out. And some of them were just very dismissive and passive with my experience as a person. Like they just treated the CF. They didn't see me as a whole human being. And Dr. Tullis saw me as a whole human being. She she understood where I was coming from, and she basically said, like, I have her back. If she has side effects with Trikafta, she's going to be okay. We'll be here for her. And that was all I needed to hear, was that some doctor had my back and wasn't going to make me feel crazy if some kind of side effect came up. I wouldn't be abandoned. And that was part of the reason why I tried alternative methods, because whenever I spoke with the doctors, they just got into a fight with me, and they didn't understand where I was coming from. So I could never really understand where they were coming from, because it never got there. So thank goodness that Dr. Tullis was a doctor that actually understood where I was coming from, because thanks to her, I started Trikafta, and I felt safe enough to start Trikafta.
And what was that? What was, we've heard like the sort of like variation of experience of starting Trikafta, like, the purge that some people go through with their mucus, and, this, pretty, it seems fairly universal, this kind of, shocking rise in energy levels and things like that after that initial sort of like shit period ends. What was that for you? And what kind of like upward curve did you see in your health?
Yeah, I think it was pretty much the same as what I've heard about Jeremy, and even when I listened to your podcast with Connie, it was instantly feeling better. It was funny though, because when I started it, 3 days later, I got sick with a cold, and I was pissed, because I was like,
wait, what?
Are you kidding me? I just got to the best health of my life, and now I have a cold? Like, are you kidding me right now? But yeah, my lung function went from 61% to 77% in the first couple months, and by the end of the first year, it was up to 81%. And the doctors were, I remember going to my first appointment after starting Trikafta, and the doctors were like, they're kind of afraid of me because they know what I'm like, but they basically said, because you have to wear masks, they said, I can't really read your expression behind your mask. I don't know how you're feeling. We're feeling really excited. We're feeling really happy for you. But how are you feeling? You seem like you don't seem that happy. And honestly, like, I had never felt worse mentally. As soon as I started Trikafta, I experienced like the deepest, darkest depression of my life. And for me, it took me a while to figure it out, because I remember going on a walk with my mom and being like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, physically, this is the best I've ever felt. So why do I feel so shitty? And what I realized was that I was in survival mode for my entire life, really. And all of a sudden, I was safe. It reminds me of when you watch a tennis match, and the whole time that athlete is just trying to keep the ball bouncing back and forth. And that was me for most of my life. I'm just trying, the CF was my opponent, and I'm just trying to bounce that ball back and forth. I'm just trying to stay in the game. And Trikafta is what enabled me to win the match. And when an athlete wins a match, they just collapse out of pure physical, mental exhaustion. And that was what I felt like. Like, internally, I just collapsed because I had won. And now came the time for me to process and sort through everything I didn't have the capacity to deal with when I was in survival mode. And that was when I really processed a lot of the fact that I almost died. I escaped death, and the grief that also comes with being like survivor's guilt, almost like thinking about all the CF patients that didn't make it here and how I just got lucky, and thinking about, well, what does it all mean? Like, all that work and all that alternative methods I did and all the hell I put myself through, what does it all mean now? Because I just took a pill and all of a sudden that goes away. Like, it just felt like I went through so many different moments and emotions of just like, what does it mean? Like, it was really dark and unexpected, but I know that that's a common experience for
yeah.
I
mean, how did you work through that? Like, did you start to incorporate talk therapy, or was this more of like a, your own internal I guess like journey towards
did you try
thinking these things out?
Did you try like another root vegetable or something?
Switching from squash to beets.
Yeah.
It's funny, when I started Trikafta, I was still trying to continue with my, diet of squash, and I realized that now I was so healthy that I had to eat like a normal person. So that was a huge transition.
Yeah, they're like, you don't need the salmon IV anymore.
No, you're good. Yeah. But for me, so I started therapy when I was 20. I started Trikafta when I was 23. And I read this book called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. It was written in the 90s. I'm sure you guys are familiar with it. And it's about trauma, and how trauma is when you don't have agency in a situation. And when you're dealing with a fatal disease, that's a classic example. And up until Trikafta, all of my sessions were about dealing with going to the hospital and dealing with all the negative results, because that was really triggering and difficult to come to terms with the fact that my body was declining. And I continued with, so the therapy I did was EMDR therapy. It's eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And I also did IFS, which is internal family systems therapy. And internal family systems therapy is another way to treat trauma. It's also called parts work. So I did those two modalities. Luckily, I found the right therapist in therapy, because prior to that point, I always felt like I was outsmarting my therapist. Like, I did talk therapy once with this one therapist, and she didn't really understand. Like, I don't know. It just felt like child's play for me talking to some of these therapists. And I'm a bit of a smart ass too, and I know that about myself. But it's just like, this therapist luckily could meet me where I was at, and she really helped me feel seen, heard, and understood in this transition. And one of the questions she asked me, which was just so interesting, was, have you come to terms with the fact that you have your whole life ahead of you now, that your lifespan is not short anymore? And that just like, I was like, no, because when I started Trikafta, I still was living like Mach 2 with my hair on fire, like everything, like I was living as if I was going to die tomorrow. And that's how I lived most of my life. And that was a huge change for me, of just coming to terms with the fact that I had my whole life ahead of me. Because when I turned 25, I literally was like, all right, like, I feel like I'm an adult now. Like, why am I not further ahead in life? Like, what's going on? Like, I thought by the time I was 25, I'd be towards, I think subconsciously, you know, towards the end of my life. And now I have my whole life ahead of me, and adjusting to that is like a whole thing in and of itself. And my most recent therapy session was one of the hardest therapy sessions I've ever had. And I just sat there and held this part of myself and just let myself cry for like, I don't even know how long. And it was just that part of me that had to hold and carry the burden of cystic fibrosis my whole life. And it was just this visual in my session of taking that part of me that actually died. The CF body died. And taking the ashes of that and sprinkle it over through my backyard in my mind, of coming to terms with the fact that cystic fibrosis version of me is dead and has died, and moving forward with that. And I'm still going through it. Like I'm still, it'll be 2 years this January. So it's still really new for me. And it's just been a huge mental health journey. It's funny too, because you think when you survive something, and it's interesting with movies too, like when you watch a survival movie, the movie always ends when they survive the thing, but that's when the journey starts. Like It's not like you survive it and it's like, all right, they're good, they're done, they're great. It's like, no, that's the hard part, because like I wasn't facing death anymore, I was facing myself and my trauma.
Yeah, you know, it's like one thing that comes up for me, and I hope it's okay that I say this.
Go ahead.
Because I've also like had to remind myself, and like have caught myself. So just to be kind of specific about language.
Yeah.
And the language that we tend to use, and especially the language that tends to get used around something like Trikafta. It is such a stark difference between who I am today physically in my body compared to who I was in my body 3 years ago. Those two things are night and day.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of parts in me that feel like I have escaped death. There is parts of me that feel like I don't really have CF anymore. I don't live with CF anymore. But the thing is that I still do have CF. I still have to take a number of medications to treat that CF. Even with the Trikafta, if I stopped taking my enzymes today, and I stopped, I stopped trying to maintain a diet that like keeps my weight up. I mean, you know, I would probably start to wither away. If I stopped taking my enzymes, I probably wouldn't live very long, you know. If we had a all of a sudden, you know, global tensions rise to a point where whoopsie daisy, someone pressed a button and now North America it no longer is connected to any kind of power grid and we don't have power for 12 months. Well, everybody's going to be in pretty bad shape, but I'll tell you right now, I'm probably not going to make it those 12 months. Right? So like there are elements to this situation that I find myself in where I need to remind myself that this isn't a cure. Yes, I have survived, I've dodged a death that was maybe right at my front door, but, and who knows, like it's a little too early to tell. I really do think, but as we look to the future and as things look currently, the chances are probably pretty high that, if nothing takes me prior to reaching the age of 80 outside, nothing like cancer or getting hit by a bus or whatever, maybe I will live to 80 with CF if I just keep taking Trikafta and that's all that we have. And this is where like we peak, but also maybe not like that. That's not a guarantee, right?
Yeah.
If I got pneumonia tomorrow, that's still going to f me up in a big way, potentially, than it would say Brian or Taylor, right? And so the whole reason that I state this is just to say that yeah, it's a mind-boggling shift mentally to go from this version of yourself that you once thought was like as strong as you are, you're trapped in a body that is a little bit weaker than the rest, and you have to tiptoe around. You got to be really careful. You got to ensure you're doing this, that, and the other thing, or else you're going to be dead in 5 years. And then all of a sudden find yourself in this body where you're like, holy f***, I feel a lot like a normal human. Mm-hmm. I feel really different. I feel like I no longer live in that same body that I had, which is true that you do. Trikafta is not a cure. We still live with this disease, and there are still elements that could pop up that unbeknownst to us, these unforeseen things that can put a wedge in your situation, and you find yourself in a position where you're thinking, oh, I thought I was cured, but I guess I'm not. And the whole point of me bringing all that up is just to be really specific about the fact that, like, yes, this is awesome, but also it's not like the stamp of approval that like you made it and you survived and you're out. Because technically we're still in it. It just looks a hell of a lot different.
I think that's the beautiful thing about parts work too, is like what you just described, Jer, is like such a messy group of thoughts to like dig through.
Yeah.
And set of feelings, and like to be able to do parts work, and like for those who aren't familiar, it's really like pulling out the pieces of that are the yous in that moment and naming them and visualizing them and finding the place that they fit inside of your mind and in your heart, and like being able to honor those individual feelings that you get, because like the world is messy, and like we are messy as humans, and it is really hard to figure out what this all means when you put everything together. But when you pull out those individual pieces, it's easier to like honor them individually, I suppose.
And I think a part of me wants to state that, because like when you hear someone's story about CF and they get Trikafta and it's like, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's not. It's yes, it is amazing.
Yes,
and it's also super
Yes,
fucking
and.
complicated.
Yeah.
It's so complicated, and like, as you're moving through the world trying to work through what the that even means, sometimes it feels a little isolating, because like it doesn't feel like anybody really gets it,
Yeah, and that's why I was so excited to speak with all you guys, because you remind me a lot of my family, because you Brian and Taylor, you've been with Jeremy through this whole thing. You're his sense of continuity in this experience, and that's been like with my family. And we were recently talking about, because I filmed a reel for my speaking, and my sisters were filming my talk, and I was talking about my whole experience with cystic fibrosis, and we got in the car, and they were like, oh yeah, right, like you did almost die. Oh yeah, right. Like, oh my gosh, like I I forgot, like, it created this whole conversation between us of how when I started Trikafta for my whole family, it was a weight lifted for them too. Like, they'd been carrying that burden alongside me
Mm-hmm.
and how it affected them. And they're my sisters always joke, they're like, support for the support who are supporting. Like, they need help too. Like, it affects everybody. No one who loves a patient with CF gets through it without feeling it too in their own way. Like, that's a whole other thing. And it was just interesting for us to have that conversation because when I was going through it, I didn't realize how hard it was on my family because I was just trying to survive and they're just trying to help me survive, but also not put their fears onto me. And my mom used to go to my sisters without me knowing. I didn't know this at the time. And she would go to my sisters and be like, do you think she's going to be okay? And my sisters were like teenagers. They're like, I don't know, Mom. Like,
Yeah, you tell me.
yeah, you tell me. I don't know. And my mom's mom passed away from cancer when she was in her late 20s. And so it was an interesting connection between my grandma, my mom, and me because my journey with CF was very triggering for my mom. Like, she was afraid that she was going to lose me. Like, she lost her mother. And I also feel like there's this connection. Now, this might be a bit woo-woo, but I do feel like that there is a connection between grief in the lungs, and that I feel like my mom got pregnant with me a year after her mom died, and both my parents were carriers of the gene, and my mom always asked, like, why it was a 25% chance, why did you get CF and your sisters didn't? And there's a part of me that feels like because she was grieving, something about that triggered cystic fibrosis. And my a family friend of mine lost his wife, and he has 2 sons with cystic fibrosis. So I feel like there's a grief element with it, and there's just this connection. And I feel like it's been an interesting call for our family to heal all of that. I feel like cystic fibrosis for me, a lot of the purpose in my life has been to heal my family's trauma, because it's this blaring obvious sign of, it's not just about our physical health, it's about the mental side and how that affects us generationally. Like, my mom also has these weird stories of, like, when she was pregnant with me, her mom visited her in a dream, and I was growing on these grapes which look like lungs, and her mom told her she's gonna be okay. There's gonna be a really rough start for her, but she's gonna be okay. And most of my life, like, when I went through, well, especially when I went through this really difficult time where I was down to 88 pounds, my mom went to this energy healer who said, I don't know where your energy starts and your daughter's and your mom's ends. Like, you are still connected to your mother and you're putting that on your daughter, and there's not enough space. Like, your daughter's strong, she's a survivor, she's going to be okay. You need to let her go. And so it was this journey of my mom, when she thought I was dying, of coming to terms with the fact that I could die and letting it go. And that was a huge transformation for her. And as soon as she let me go and was okay with, she just had to, she took up a lot of spirituality. She just really did a lot of work on herself. And as soon as she did that, I was starting to get better. So it was just a really interesting journey of that connection between grief and trauma in a family, and how now we're at a place where I've really done a lot of work on myself in healing. And because of that, my mom started doing a lot of work on herself in healing her generational trauma. So it's been really interesting to see how, because of CF, there's been this silver lining of it, of not continuing the burdens of our grandmothers and grandfathers and family before us.
What would you say is the biggest thing that CF has taken away from you?
I think just normalcy. I think feeling connected to my body, feeling safe. There were many years where I felt dissociated, like my body would dissociate. Like, I remember feeling like all the happy moments of my life, I'd feel sad. I remember being out with my family. We were on vacation. My grandparents joined us. It was like this super happy thing. And I felt so disconnected. Like, I just didn't even, it just felt like there was this wall between myself and my experience. And it was devastating for me, because I just felt like CF was the block between me feeling safe and present and being able to just enjoy and live my life. Like, it felt like this thing that was getting in the way of everything. it was like the antagonistic force of my life. I couldn't even enjoy my life at moments. And that was really sad and difficult because, like, what do you have if you can't just enjoy your life? Like, I just couldn't. There's so many times where I just literally couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say is the biggest thing that it's given you?
It's definitely humbled me. I think, like, having a health condition is incredibly humbling. You have to face your mortality at a very young age. And I think, and it's interesting too, because that can be very isolating. I had a really hard time when I was young connecting with my peers because I was dealing with this like life or death situation, and my peers were dealing with like having sex for the first time. Like, I was like, I'm like, this is not important. Like, I remember being at a dinner, my friends were like, how many people have you slept with? And, you know, and I was like, what do you, like, that doesn't mean anything in comparison to what I'm going through right now. And I went through a phase of my life where I had only friends who were over 40. It was called like Friends Over 40, where it was all like my mom's friends that had the wisdom and maturity to see my situation for what it was and appreciate me for who I was. And it wasn't until recently that I started working at this mental health nonprofit that I found friends who had also been through adversity. One of my closest friends, she lost her sister to suicide when she was 19. And that totally changed the trajectory of her life. And so I think, again, what it's given me is a sense of no bullshit, like just being in tune with people who have no bullshit and finding people like that. And it's really enhanced the quality of my life for sure. Like, I definitely feel like I could easily be an out of touch person if I hadn't gone through what I went through.
Well, Madison, I mean, it's just absolutely lovely to talk to you and get your perspective on how CF has shaped your life. Again, it's so unique. Every time we have somebody on the show who has CF, it's like, oh, we have all these things in common. And then you talk to them and you're like, wow, the way that it has affected you and the way that you view it and the way that you live with it. There are so many elements there that are the same, but also so unique, and it's just such a fun opportunity and experience to be able to speak to anybody living with cystic fibrosis. How can people find you? How can people stay up to date with the work that you're doing? Let people know where you're at.
Yeah, I think the best way to follow me would be on Instagram at Madison MacGregor. That's MAC, not MC like Conor McGregor, but MAC. And also our mental health page at myteam.social. I host a podcast called Mind Time with Madison where we talk about mental health. And we have really great tips for helping young people with their mental health.
Amazing. Thank you. This was so fun.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here, and I really enjoyed speaking with you guys.